Most of us were never taught how to say our final words. And sometimes, the words meant to comfort end up hurting the most. Many of us become overwhelmed when facing a loved one nearing the end. Not because we lack love, but because no one ever prepared us for moments like these. No one taught us simply what to say, or how to be silent. We often think that saying something kind and gentle is enough. But sometimes, even those kind words can make the person in the hospital bed feel more alone than ever. Emma stood by her mother's bedside. The room was quiet, filled only with the steady beeping of a heart monitor and the dim yellow glow of the bedside lamp. Her mother, June, was 82, in the final stage of kidney failure and living her last days. Emma didn't know what to say. She held her mother's hand and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. You'll be okay. You'll get through this." Her mother didn't respond. She stared out the window, her eyes clouded but still holding light. Emma tried to smile. She didn't want her mother to feel afraid. She didn't want herself to cry. And so she said the words that she would regret for the rest of her life. A few hours later, when her mother was no longer conscious, a nurse sat down beside Emma and gently said, "Sometimes the best thing isn't hope, it's an honest presence. She knows what's happening. What she needs now isn't the promise of getting better. She needs permission to be weak, to cry, to let go." Emma could only nod, tears falling. She realized she had tried so hard to be strong that she didn't see what her mother needed. And the most painful part wasn't losing her mom. It was knowing she missed the chance to say the right final words. So many of us have been in that same place. We stand by the bed of someone we love, hearts full of affection, but unsure how to express it. We're afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid that silence might be wrong too. And in our uncertainty, we repeat phrases we've heard others say. "Hang in there. You'll be fine. Don't worry. Don't cry. This too shall pass." We don't realize that sometimes those words become invisible walls that block the last emotions our loved ones need to feel. That's why in this video, we'll go through 7 common phrases that seem comforting, but can make an older adult at the end of life feel abandoned, misunderstood, and robbed of the peace they need most. These aren't cruel words. On the contrary, they often come from love. But that's precisely why we need to understand when to say them and when to remain quiet. And just as importantly, we'll explore what we can say instead. Words that truly touch the heart. Phrases that don't promise, don't sugarcoat, don't avoid, but show up. Be there, stay close, understand. Because in those final days, what an aging soul needs most isn't to be cheered on to fight, but to be permitted to be fragile. Stop pretending, to stop pleasing anyone, to be themselves fully before they go. If you're caring for a parent, a grandparent, or someone close to you who is seriously ill, then this video is for you. Not to make you perfect, but to help you avoid regret. To help you walk out of that room after the last goodbye with a lighter heart. Because you said the right thing, or at the very least, stayed silent at the right time. And if you've already been through this, if you've said the wrong words or wished you'd done it differently, please don't carry that guilt for too long. Because today, you can learn again. You can do better. You can share this so others don't repeat the same mistakes. Because sometimes, just one sentence can make the difference between a painful goodbye and a peaceful one. Are you ready? Let's begin. 1. I know how you feel. Harold Mason was once a Marine. In every situation, he lived with strict discipline, honor, and an unshakable sense of duty. But at 81, in a quiet hospital room with an oxygen tube in his nose, he was no longer the man who had marched through fiery battlefields. Now, he was a thin, frail, older man, his voice raspy from late-stage lung cancer. Beginning a journey no military training could ever prepare him for. His son, Daniel, stood at his bedside, gently holding his father's bony hand. He stayed silent for a long moment, searching for something worthy enough to say. Then he finally spoke. "Dad, I know how you feel. I understand. You're going to be okay." Harold didn't look back. He turned his head and gave a soft cough. Daniel thought maybe his father was just tired and didn't read too much into it. But when a nurse came by to adjust the IV, she leaned in and quietly said to Daniel, "He hears everything. Maybe what you said wasn't what he needed right now." The words, "I know how you feel," may sound kind, empathetic, even comforting. But to Harold, a man who had survived the war, lost his wife, and was now lying in wait for death, those words felt empty. Worse, they felt like a dismissal, like his experience was being reduced to something ordinary. How could a healthy 40-year-old man who had never stared death in the face truly understand what that felt like? It wasn't that Daniel didn't love his father. It's that he didn't realize. Sometimes, in trying too hard to understand someone, we miss the chance to listen truly. Harold once told an older nurse that the thing that saddened him most near the end wasn't the physical pain. It wasn't the discomfort. It was the feeling that everyone assumed they knew what he was going through, so no one ever really asked, "How are you feeling? Is there anything you want to say?" What he needed most was someone to sit beside him, not to talk, not to fix, but someone brave enough to let the silence remain unfilled so he could say what truly mattered to him. Because every person at the end of life is their universe, shaped by a lifetime of memories, regrets, hopes, and fears. And no one not really can know how that feels, except the person living it. So instead, the best thing you can say in that moment is, "I can't imagine what you're feeling, but I'm here with you." That one sentence frees the person from the burden of being misunderstood. It gives them space to be fully themselves, to speak if they wish, or to rest knowing someone is beside them, not pretending to get it, not rushing to help, just being there. After that day, Daniel changed. He stopped trying to say too much. He came earlier, stayed longer, and when his father turned to look at him, he would smile and say, "I don't know what you're feeling, Dad, but I'm here. I'm listening if you want to share." And Harold did share. He talked about things he had never told anyone, about the last battle that took his best friend. He once dreamed of being a teacher, but life led him down the path of a soldier, about the deep love he had for Daniel's mother, a love he had never quite put into words. Daniel silently sat there, knowing these stories would stay with him forever. They weren't just memories. They were the final gift his father left behind, not made of things, but of truth and connection. Many people think that when someone is dying, they don't want to talk. But the truth is, they only stop talking when they no longer feel safe to be themselves. And every time we say, "I understand," we're quietly locking the door. But when we say, "I don't understand, but I'm here," we open it. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is sit down, hold their hand, and let them know you don't have all the answers, but you're not going anywhere. You're here, not to fix anything, but to walk this final stretch together. Have you heard someone say, "I know how you feel"? Leave a comment with, "I've heard this," if you've witnessed this moment, and you understand why, sometimes, fewer words can carry more meaning than a whole speech. 2. Stay positive. Keep fighting. Lucille Green had always been a strong woman. For over 40 years, she worked as the head nurse at a hospital in Missouri. She was the woman who moved quickly through the halls, who knew every patient's chart by heart, and who never wavered, no matter what the day brought. Her co-workers called her the light that never went out, and patients would often say, As soon as she walks in the room, I feel safe. But now, Lucille was 79. Her heart had grown weaker over the years. End-stage heart failure had made every step a struggle, and each breath is a challenge. And for the first time in decades, she was no longer the caregiver, but the one being cared for. Her daughter, Hannah, flew in from New York to be by her side. Hannah came with bright energy and hope, believing a positive mindset would save her mom. She read books, listened to podcasts, and watched videos about the power of will and fighting illness with your spirit. She believed that if her mother had always been strong, she could surely get through this too. One morning, while helping her mother change clothes, Hannah knelt, held her hand, and said, "Don't give up, Mom. You have to stay positive. You have to keep fighting. You're going to beat this." Lucille gave a gentle smile, but something in her chest tightened. Not because the words were cruel, but because they just didn't fit anymore. She had been fighting her whole life. She fought through the fear of losing her husband in a car accident. She fought through long shifts and emergency deliveries no one else dared to take. She had lived a life of strength and courage, more than most could imagine. But now, what she needed most was not to fight, but to be allowed to stop. She didn't blame Hannah. She understood her daughter was scared. Scared of losing her. Scared to let go. But Lucille also knew, if no one dared to speak the truth, she'd be forced to keep pretending to make others feel better. And that was the most exhausting part of all. Hannah didn't realize it, but Lucille's private nurse, Rachel, had been in the room that day. After Hannah left, Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, gently took Lucille's hand, and quietly said, "If you're tired, you can say you're tired. No one here is asking you to push through." And that's when Lucille finally cried. Not from sadness, but because someone had finally given her permission to rest. Words like "stay strong," "don't give up," "you have to fight." They sound powerful, even inspirational. But those words can become a burden in the final days of life. They can make someone feel like if they let go, they've somehow failed. If they feel tired, they're somehow not trying hard enough. If they want peace, they're seen as giving up. No one wants to die with the feeling that they've disappointed someone. But sadly, many people do, because they were expected to be strong to the very end. And here's the truth. Real strength doesn't always mean continuing to fight. Sometimes, true courage is knowing when to let go peacefully. If you truly love someone who's seriously ill, instead of telling them to stay positive or keep fighting, try saying this instead. "I'm here with you, no matter what." No expectations, no pressure, just unconditional presence. That simple sentence is like a warm blanket. It asks nothing. It only surrounds and soothes. After that day, Hannah began to understand. She stopped repeating, "You have to fight, Mom." Instead, she learned to sit beside her mother, resting Lucille's hand gently on her lap and simply whispering, "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to be strong anymore." Lucille passed away 3 weeks later. Nothing miraculous happened, but in those 3 weeks, for the first time in years, she was allowed to be a woman who didn't have to be strong. And for the first time, Hannah realized that love isn't about lifting someone with slogans, but about being with them in truth, weakness, and even unraveling. How would you feel if you were exhausted and someone still told you to keep pushing? Type "I understand" if you've ever been in that place. Because in this final journey, what people need isn't to win, but to be allowed to stop in the arms of someone who loves them. 3. It's part of God's plan. Thomas Ray was 85 years old. He had spent his whole life serving a small church in a quiet riverside town in Ohio. He was a pastor for over 40 years, a man deeply loved by everyone in the city. He baptized newborns, officiated weddings, and gently prayed people into eternity at their funerals. To him, faith wasn't something grand or mysterious. It was daily kindness. It was listening without interrupting. It gave me a warm hug at the end of a long day. But now it was Thomas himself lying in a hospital bed, his kidneys failing, his body growing weaker by the day. The people who had once listened to his sermons now came individually to visit. They brought love, sorrow, and words of comfort. Among the phrases he heard most often were, "This is all part of God's plan." The people who said it meant well. They weren't trying to be hurtful. They didn't know what else to say. They wanted to bring peace. They wanted to believe that all of this somehow made sense. But to Thomas, those words no longer brought the comfort they once did. He wasn't angry at anyone, but he felt trapped in a box of faith, a box he had helped build through years of preaching. And now he wasn't so sure, not because he had lost his belief in God, but because he had entered a place beyond certainty, a foggy land where pain had no clear meaning, where every night he quietly asked, "If this is God's plan, then why does it look like this?" They were deep questions, private questions. These are questions no one else could answer for him. And the more he heard phrases like, "God has his reasons," the more he felt stripped of something vital, his right to feel pain, his right to grieve, his right to question. His son, Jacob, was a profoundly religious man. As Thomas grew weaker, Jacob often said, "God is doing something extraordinary through you, Dad. We can't see it, but we must trust the plan." Thomas would nod, but inside he felt quietly alone. Not because Jacob was wrong, but because right now, Thomas didn't need a plan. He needed a son to sit down beside him and say, "I don't know, but I'm here." His private nurse, Helen, later shared that one night, Thomas woke up at 2 a.m. and whispered, "I used to think I could preach about death, but now I know death isn't a sermon. It's a question with no answer. And sometimes, the best thing we can do is leave that question open." The phrase, "It's part of God's plan," may sound comforting, but when someone is standing on the edge between life and death, it can blur or even silence the very real pain they're feeling. It can make them feel as if they're not allowed to ask, not allowed to mourn, not allowed to doubt. But those doubts, those moments of deep wrestling, are often the most human part of them. We don't need to be theologians to sit with someone who is dying. We don't need to explain everything. Sometimes, silent presence is the only thing they truly need. Instead of saying, "This is God's will," try saying, "I don't have the answers, but I'm here with you." That sentence makes no promises, but it opens up space, a space where the person in pain can breathe, can feel, can be exactly who they are without being covered by grand explanations. Jacob eventually came to understand this. One day, he visited his father without a single Bible verse prepared. He sat down, placed his hand gently on his father's chest, and remained quiet. After a while, Thomas turned to him and said, "You know, this is the first time I felt truly seen, not as a pastor, but as a father who's afraid. Thank you. Not everything that happens has a reason. Not all pain needs an explanation. And having faith doesn't mean always knowing where you're going. Sometimes, real faith is having the courage to stay with what is unknown, to sit beside someone in pain without trying to fix it, justify it, or soothe it with words you're not even sure about yourself. Do you believe that silent presence can mean more than words meant to comfort? Type present if you agree. Because maybe, just maybe, our honest presence is the last and most significant gift we can give in those final moments. 4. Don't cry. Irene Walton was 74. She used to be quick-witted, sharp, and full of personality. A high school literature teacher whose classes students never forgot because her lessons were rich with imagery and emotion. But since the day her husband, Walter, passed away from a sudden stroke last year, something in Irene had gone quiet. It was like half of her had dimmed. People said Irene was strong. At Walter's funeral, many whispered to one another, "She's so brave. She didn't cry, didn't faint like others." But what they didn't know was she couldn't cry. Not because she didn't want to, but because everyone was watching, and everyone seemed to expect her to stay composed. 7 months after Walter's passing, Irene was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a disease often caught late and difficult to treat. She didn't say much, but her youngest daughter, Marissa, moved in to care for her. Each day, Marissa tried to bring her mother light. Fresh, she thought flowers, soft music, cheerful news, and uplifting words were helpful. One afternoon, Irene sat quietly in her chair, looking out at the garden Walter once lovingly tended. Her eyes grew misty. She reached for her teacup, once part of a pair, now sitting alone. And then, the tears came. Not a loud sob, just quiet tears that couldn't be stopped. Marissa saw it and panicked. She rushed over, put her arms around her mother and said quickly, "Don't cry, Mom. You have to be strong. If you cry, I won't be able to take it." Irene wiped her tears fast, as if crying were shameful, as if it meant she was weak or alone. And in that very moment, a part of her closed off. She didn't cry again, at least not in front of her daughter. But from that day on, she began turning away from the cheerful stories, the upbeat songs, and the garden walks. Because deep inside, one message had been carved in. I'm not allowed to be sad. I'm not allowed to cry. I must not burden anyone with how I feel. And that quiet burden may be one of the cruelest things a dying person can be made to carry. The feeling that they must apologize for their pain. No one means to do that. Marissa loved her mother deeply, but like so many of us, she was afraid of tears, afraid of the truth. And without meaning to, she used encouragement, like a blanket that covered up real emotion, leaving the person in pain lying silently beneath it, unable to move. One day, Irene asked her nurse, Rachel, a question so soft it was nearly a whisper. Have you ever seen someone be fragile and still be loved? Rachel didn't answer right away. She held Irene's hand and said, "You can cry if you need to. I'll sit here with you." That was all. No advice, no interruption. There is no rush to wipe the tears away. And for the first time in a long, long while, Irene truly cried. Her shoulders shook. Soft sobs came like a river finally breaking through a dam. Tears for herself, for Walter, for the empty house, for the growing fear she hadn't dared speak aloud. But through those tears, Irene could finally breathe again. Crying doesn't make someone weaker. Crying is one of the most human, healing responses to loss. Yet society teaches us to hide our tears. And for someone standing at life's final threshold, that silence can feel like erasure. When you say to someone, "Don't cry," you're not just asking them to hold in their feelings. You're telling them their pain is a problem, that it makes you uncomfortable. You're making them feel guilty for daring to feel something real. So instead, say something simpler, something more honest. Say, "You can cry if you need to. I'll sit here with you." There's no need to wipe the tears right away. No need to say, "It's okay now." Just be there and let them cry fully. After that day, Marissa sat down beside her mother. She apologized, and Irene smiled softly and said, "I don't need someone to rescue me from my tears. I need someone to sit with me when they come." There is nothing wrong with crying. It's part of letting go. part of healing. And for someone preparing to say goodbye, it may be the last chance they have to be fully, truly themselves. No masks, no roles, just human. Have you ever been told, "Don't cry," when breaking inside? Comment, "I felt that," if you know what that moment feels like. Because maybe, just maybe, you too once longed for someone to sit beside you and say, "Go ahead and cry. I'm still here." 5. You're going to get better. Elaine Murphy was 82. She was a thoughtful, intelligent woman, calm, principled, and steady. Before retiring, she had been the chief accountant at a large real estate firm. All her life, she believed in two things: clear books and clear people. No hiding, no beating around the bush. When someone lied, even to comfort, she could always tell instantly. 3 months ago, doctors told her she had advanced ovarian cancer. It had already spread to her lungs. She didn't ask many questions. She nodded and said, "I'd like to go home." From that moment, she quietly began preparing, rewriting her will, picking music for her funeral, telling her children what to keep and what not to worry about. But there was one thing she couldn't prepare for: the pretending from people around her. Her daughter Emily, ever since hearing the diagnosis, began saying the same thing almost every day. "Don't think negatively, Mom. You're going to get better. You're strong. You've always made it through before." At first, Elaine just smiled. But as the days went on, she felt a growing distance each time she heard those words. Not because Emily didn't love her, but because Emily couldn't look at the truth. A truth that Elaine felt more clearly with every passing day. Her body was shrinking fast. Eating became a struggle. And mornings, once her favorite time of day, began to feel unbearably heavy. Still, whenever she tried to speak seriously, Emily would cut her off with sweet, hopeful optimism. "Don't say that, Mom. You have to believe you'll get better." So Elaine stopped talking. She kept the truth to herself, because she knew some people aren't ready to hear what's real. And that's when she began to feel something worse than dying: loneliness. Not because she was leaving, but because she was leaving in silence, without permission to speak honestly. Her private nurse, Megan, was the first person who dared say something different. One evening, while helping her into bed, Megan said softly, "I know what's happening, Elaine, and I'm still here if you ever want to talk, truthfully." Just one sentence. But for the first time in weeks, Elaine nodded, with a look that no longer held back. She said, "Finally, someone who's not trying to make me feel better." And they talked. No pretending, no sugarcoating. Elaine spoke about the years she spent with her late husband, gone more than a decade now. She spoke of things she never got to do. Old dreams, unfinished thoughts. Not because they needed fixing, but because they required witnessing. The phrase, "you're going to get better," is often said to keep hope alive. But to someone facing death, it can feel like denial. They know their condition. They live in that body. They feel the strength fading, the time shortening, and they don't need to be soothed with a promise. That isn't true. What they do need is to be acknowledged, not to give up, but to be real in their final days. And for those left behind, we must learn to accept without avoiding. So instead of saying, "You're going to be okay," try saying, "I know what's happening, and I'm still here." It makes no false promise. It paints no prettier picture than reality, but it says something powerful. I'm not walking away, no matter what comes. After that first honest conversation, Elaine slowly opened up to others, but only to those who were ready to speak plainly. Even Emily began to change. One day, Emily sat down and said, "I know I've been trying to make you hope, but maybe that's not what you need. Maybe you need someone to be here, and I will be, And for the first time in weeks, Elaine took her daughter's hand and said, "You don't need to make me feel better. Just make me feel seen. That's enough. Nobody wants to hear a painful truth. But people who are dying, they've already heard it. From their bodies, from the doctor's eyes, from fatigue and breathlessness to signs that can't be hidden anymore. They don't need us to repeat it. They need someone who won't pretend. Do you believe that truth, spoken kindly? Is it better than a sweet lie? Comment truth if you choose honesty. 'Cause sometimes truth isn't what hurts. It's the only thing that makes someone feel respected." 6. Everything happens for a reason. Wallace Kim was 80 years old. A quiet, gentle man, deeply thoughtful and private. He spent his life as a woodworker, living in a small home in the suburbs where he and his wife raised 2 children. Their life was never flashy, but it was full, steady, and peaceful. One day, 22 years ago, his oldest son, Brian, was killed in a car accident on his way home from his 19th birthday. From that moment on, something in Wallace never came back. Outwardly, he kept living. He worked, he smiled, he took care of his family, but inside the wound never healed. People came to offer condolences. They brought flowers, food, and words they thought were needed. And among those words, the one he heard most and struggled with the most was, "Everything happens for a reason." He didn't respond, not because he agreed, but because the pain was too deep for words. Yet deep down, that phrase left him feeling suffocated. If Brian's death had a reason, then what was it? Why should a father have to bury his child? Why should the laughter at family dinners disappear forever, only to be wrapped up in a neat, easy explanation? Now, decades later, Wallace was facing a different truth. Stage 4 liver cancer. It had come like a slap out of nowhere, and this time he knew there would be no miracle. Relatives, old friends, and neighbors came to visit, and once again, like a tired refrain, he heard it. Everything happens for a reason. One young relative sat beside him, holding his hand with a thoughtful expression, and said, "I believe God has a reason for everything. Maybe this illness is meant to teach you something deeper." Wallace nodded politely, but after the young man left, he turned to his nurse and said, "If this is a lesson, I wish someone had asked if I wanted to learn it." That phrase, "everything happens for a reason," may sound comforting, but at the end of life, it can deny the very real emotions a person is feeling. Anger, fear, regret, confusion. It subtly says, "Don't be upset. There's a reason." But what the person hears is, "Your pain isn't valid. You're not allowed to question. You shouldn't be hurting." That's not healing. That's covering up. People who are dying don't need answers. They need permission to ask. They need someone to say, "If there's something you want to say, I'm here to listen." No rush to find meaning. No effort to turn it into a lesson. Just full, present listening. No interruptions. No judgments. No stories of your own. We often think that sharing philosophy will lighten someone's load. But truthfully, a silent, genuine presence can be the most potent form of peace. One day, Wallace shared a story with his nurse, Megan, a story he had never told anyone. "The night my son died, I sat in the garage alone until morning. I didn't cry. I just turned on the radio, let an old jazz record play, and sat there. All night, not a word. That was how I grieved. No noise, no tears. Just no one there to hear me when I needed it most." Megan didn't say anything. She placed her hand gently on his, and then Wallace said, "Thank you for not saying everything happens for a reason. Thank you for not trying to fix me." Perhaps the hardest thing to do when sitting with someone who's dying is to resist the urge to explain. We cling to reasons, plans, and faith because we fear helplessness. But sometimes The most profound courage is not having an answer, in letting the silence stay open. And in that space, if you're quiet enough, you may finally hear the voice of someone who has held their pain in for a lifetime, just waiting for someone patient enough to stay and listen. So what kind of person will you be? The one who explains, or the one who listens? Just type one word: listen or explain. Because in the end, authentic listening isn't about giving answers. It's about making sure no one feels alone. 7. You shouldn't feel that way. Doris Whitman, 77, was once a beloved high school literature teacher, admired by both her students and fellow teachers. Her life had been built around words, around listening deeply to others' emotions, around classrooms where she didn't just teach knowledge, but helped her students learn how to feel. She believed language could heal. What she never expected was that, in the final chapter of her own life, she would be the one longing for healing, not through treatment, but through something simple no one seemed willing to give: the right to feel. After retiring at 70, life slowed down, and then felt emptier than she had imagined. No more school bells, no more eager young eyes, no more papers to grade or lessons to plan. She began to feel invisible. At first, she hid it. She told herself, "Be grateful. You're still alive. You can still walk. You have your family." But the more she tried to be grateful, the more hollow she felt inside. Then came the diagnosis: late-stage bone cancer. And that hollow feeling turned into a fear she couldn't name. Not fear of death, but fear of disappearing without anyone ever realizing she needed to be held. One day, during a quiet conversation with her niece Lillian, Doris finally said, "I feel useless, like I'm not needed anymore." Lillian, trying to be helpful, quickly responded, "Oh, don't say that. You're still amazing. You shouldn't feel that way. You're being too negative." It sounded like encouragement, but to Doris it felt like a small, sharp blade, gentle but cutting straight through her most vulnerable truth. She smiled faintly, nodded, and went quiet. From that moment on, she stopped being honest. She only said what would keep others comfortable. She didn't share her fear of becoming a burden. She didn't talk about those long nights, wondering if she still mattered at all. She held it all inside, because she couldn't bear to hear one more time, "You shouldn't feel that way." Because the truth was, she did feel that way. And what hurt most was being told that her emotions were wrong. People nearing death often carry more than physical pain. They fear being forgotten, being left behind, being too much, and becoming unnecessary. But they don't need someone to fix their feelings. They need someone to say, "Your sadness, your anger, your confusion are human. They are allowed. They are real." When we say, "You shouldn't feel that way," we're asking someone to be someone else. Someone more cheerful, more rational, more pleasant for our sake. But we're not in their body. We haven't lived their sleepless nights. We don't know what it feels like to watch our identity slowly vanish from others' eyes. So, if anyone has ever told you, "You shouldn't feel that way," and you've wanted to scream, "But I do feel that way," then you understand what Doris was swallowing day after day. One morning, her nurse, Natalie, checked her blood pressure and listened to her heart. And after she was done, she didn't rush off. She looked Doris in the eye and said, "You can feel anything you need to feel, and I'll still be here." Doris looked up silent. Then tears began to fall. Not from pain, not from anger, but because finally someone didn't ask her to be normal anymore. That day she spoke, more than she had in an entire month. She spoke of the sting she felt when people told her, "You're old now. Just rest." She spoke of missing her students, of how it felt when her daughter-in-law whispered, Don't do too much, Mom. Let us handle it. She said she understood that it came from love. But love doesn't mean stripping someone of their right to feel. And Natalie just sat there, nodded, held her hand. It didn't fix. I didn't explain. I didn't deny it. Sometimes healing doesn't come through advice or philosophy. It comes through an honest look, a steady hand, a quiet sentence that says something sacred. You can feel anything you need to feel, and I'll still be here. That sentence was like a key, unlocking the final door, the one behind which a dying person gets full permission to be themselves, to not hide their sadness, to not pretend they're strong, to be. Have you ever wished someone would say that to you? Type needed to hear that if you've ever felt peace just by having your emotions accepted precisely as they are. Because sometimes what the dying need isn't for us to cheer them up, but to let them be sad and still feel loved. It's not what you say, how you show up. You've just journeyed with us through 7 phrases, 7 things we often say with love that may unknowingly leave behind empty spaces in someone's final days. From Harold, who didn't need answers, only someone to sit beside him and admit that no one can fully understand another's journey, to Lucille, who had fought all her life, and in the end, she just needed someone to give her permission to stop fighting, to Thomas, a lifelong pastor who no longer needed spiritual explanations, just an honest, silent presence, to Irene, a woman of great strength who only began to feel alive again when she was finally allowed to cry, to Elaine, who didn't need a promise that things will be okay, but someone brave enough to say, I know what's happening, and I'm still here. To Wallace, who had once buried his son and lived through quiet, unnamed sorrow, and only needed someone to listen without searching for reasons that didn't exist. And finally to Doris, who had spent her life listening to the feelings of others, but had to hide her own until someone finally said, You are allowed to feel everything you feel. You see, none of them needed a philosophical lesson. None of them required false promises. None of them needed forced positivity in those final moments. All they needed was someone who wouldn't leave, someone who wouldn't fix it, someone who wouldn't explain, just someone who would stay, hold a hand, and say, I don't know what to do, but I'm not going anywhere. We know these final moments are hard to talk about. They're the moments we avoid thinking about until they come too close. And when they do, you'll realize what matters isn't having the perfect words. What matters is knowing when to be quiet and to stay. Have you ever witnessed someone's final moments? Do you ever wish you had said something or stayed silent instead? We invite you to share your story in the comments, because every story, every memory can be a gentle reminder to someone else. You're not alone. We've all stumbled. We've all said the wrong thing. We've all had regrets. But we can all learn again starting today. This video isn't just for you to watch. It's for you to remember, to help you avoid the regret that millions have felt. And if something in you was moved by what you heard, please send this video to someone caring for a parent. Share your honest story in the comments. And subscribe to Graceful Aging Co. so we can continue learning how to love at the right time before it's too late.